Hello everyone. Here's some interesting footage of the Brazilian countryside that I filmed on my phone. Also, I wanted to share some tips and information about travelling by coach in Brazil. This was a journey that I took from Campinas in the state of Sao Paulo to Uberaba in the state of Minas Gerais in the southeast of the country. It was a 7-hour trip, so I had quite a bit of time on my hands, and I started to film in a spontaneous and unplanned way. Hence the sometimes unstable camera shots as we went over some bumps in the road. Brazil is most famous for its stunning coastline with an array of beautiful beaches and enormous bays. But I think the interior of the country is just as impressive with its mountains, lakes, rivers, and waterfalls, not to mention the many interesting cities along the way. I find looking out of the window on long coach journeys one of the most relaxing things you can do. Letting the rugged but also green scenery slowly pass by. As there's a lot of agriculture in Brazil, you quite often pass farms and ranches, and it's common to spot herds of cattle and other animals moving about the fields. I've long been fascinated by the Brazilian countryside, mainly for its vastness. Like most tourists, I end up spending much of my time in the cities, but I have a curiosity to discover the countryside in more detail. Whilst the population of Brazil is 215 million, it's a highly urbanised population, meaning that the rural areas are relatively sparsely populated. This footage is of the interior of the state of Sao Paulo, which is actually the state with the highest population in the country, of 45 million people. Travelling by coach is the go-to method of transportation in Brazil, unless you're flying or driving. Trains aren't really widespread enough to make them a reliable option, and they only really exist in the big cities. So chances are, if you're travelling cross-country, you'll be taking the coach at some point. With that in mind, coaches in Brazil are very good on the whole, with comfortable reclining seats and air conditioning as standard. It's actually a surprisingly decent experience, and part of that experience is just looking out of the window, watching the world go by and having a daydream. And in that respect, it affords you a chance to chill out for a few moments and reflect on your journey so far. There are stops at big and very elaborate service stations along the motorways, which serve excellent food and drink to break up the journey. However, like most service stations in every country in the world, they tend to be quite expensive. When it comes to getting organised, you can book tickets online, but to be honest, buying your tickets at the counter before you travel, in my experience, tended to be easier and was usually the same price as online. A top tip that I learned this time around is that they have chilled drinking water available in little sealed plastic cups at the back of the vehicle in a small fridge. This water is complimentary for all passengers, but they do tend to run out, so my advice would be to get some early on during the journey. Obviously, travelling by car is more convenient and quicker, but the coaches are reliable and offer more flexibility for tourists. In my experience, hiring a car in Brazil, whilst reasonably priced, is not something I would do again, as the driving etiquette is completely different to what I'm used to in Europe, and there's a far higher number of traffic accidents. In short, you're much safer on a massive coach than you are in a car, especially on routes that you're not familiar with, and in my case, when you're driving on the other side of the road. Coach stations, or rodoviárias in Portuguese, are hubs in almost every town or city in Brazil, and you can always find a good selection of cafes and bars inside to pass the time whilst you're there. The only caveat that I would point out is that there are often delays in departure times, typically up to 15 minutes, and if you're unlucky, even more than that. However, it's compulsory to arrive at least 15 minutes before the scheduled departure to give time to stow away your baggage and board the vehicle. But punctuality has a different meaning in Brazil, and the whole concept of being on time is much more flexible than it is in the UK, for example. So a healthy dash of patience is a key attribute in this situation. Also, Wi-Fi can be an issue on coaches. Despite being advertised on board, I was unable to access it on any of my coach journeys in Brazil. In general, I would wholeheartedly recommend travelling by coach if you're a tourist in Brazil, as they offer the most flexibility, the best value for money, and a very safe option. You can even meet people and make new friends on the coach. As the journeys are typically quite long, there's plenty of time to chat and make connections with fellow passengers on board, especially if you want to practice your Portuguese. Thanks very much for watching. I really appreciate your time. If you're enjoying this video, please subscribe for more content that might be up your street. Take care, and I'll see you soon. Bye.